Hi guys, welcome to another Two Dannies at the 9-inch charge. Just a reminder, beer mats. If you want to get yourself a Two Dannies beer mat and a shiny 9-inch charge sticker, sign up to Patreon or become a member on YouTube, and we'll organise getting some freebies flying your way. Aren't we nice like that? Actually, Dan will organise it. I don't do anything. I just turn up for the videos. So is Warhammer Age of Sigmar better than Warhammer Fantasy?
Yes, that is the question from Chris Goff. We put it out there. We said, what do you want us to record on? What do you want us to talk about? Chris obviously hates us, and or maybe he's got some popcorn ready for the comments. But we are going to discuss it. We are going to go there. Dan, thoughts?
There is no discussion. It is better. Age of Sigmar is better than Warhammer Fantasy.
Why do you think so?
That's it. Why do I think so? Okay. So the first thing to say, because there's the obvious sitting on the fence, is I love both a great deal. So it isn't better than Warhammer Fantasy because of a failing necessarily on Fantasy's part. But I think it's much more accessible as a game system. I think the spread out units and the not ranked up and restrictive movement that you maybe saw in Fantasy lends itself to easily getting into the game, and is less frustrating, I guess. I think that the setting has room for everything that the old world had, plus loads of other stuff. So you can have some great grungy, dark, grim cities and goings on in the mortal realms, but you can also have your high fantasy floating mountains, walking mountains, massive beasties. You know, it spawned an incredible miniatures range, far bigger miniatures range, because of what's in it, and it's more alive, I guess. I think the 2 minutes to midnight setting of the Warhammer Old World has loads going for it, but Age of Sigmar is growing constantly, and all the time. And that's not to say I love the Old World. I mean, we said already we're looking at doing Mordheim when Warhammer the Old World comes out. I'd love to dive into that. I love Warmaster because I've got a real place in my heart for the Warhammer Old World. I love it. I love its realness of setting, I guess. But I do think Age of Sigmar is a better setting and a better rule set.
When I was thinking about this, I started thinking about the lore. And one thing is that if you turn, for example, to Black Library, there's so much written about Warhammer Fantasy, and I think because it had a long history and people writing about it for a long time and lots of sagas. I think Age of Sigmar isn't quite there yet. I don't feel the same attachment to the characters in Age of Sigmar that I did in Warhammer Fantasy, but I really do think that the potential in Age of Sigmar for those characters to develop and the lore to progress is much more, because as you said, there was that 2 minutes to midnight situation. I mean, Warhammer Fantasy Battles stayed in the same year for every year that it was out through every edition. Nothing really changed a lot, and you would hear, and often they would add in stories from the past. So talking about my Wood Elves, as I always do, when they added Araloth in as a character in 8th edition, they wrote his story into the backstory, rather than saying, here he is, and this is what he's doing, and this is what he's going to do. I suppose they did a bit with the end times, but that was quite a different situation. Whereas in Age of Sigmar, when it comes to the lore, although, as I said, I'm not as familiar with the characters and they don't mean as much to me, they've blown up whole cities and things like this. A Mortok was kicked off the edge of a realm, just into oblivion, and so much more can happen. so I think for that reason, although it's a less familiar setting, and it's probably a setting that I don't know if I do prefer the Mortal Realms, because I don't know a lot about them. So if I was to talk to someone about the lore of the Realm of Metal, I wouldn't know anything about it. But I do prefer how exciting it can be. And if there's going to be a campaign, like, I know that there's something big is going to happen, and it's not all it isn't going to end up back where it was, and that's something that's really big for me for Age of Sigmar.
Yeah, and I think it's so driven by the miniatures as well, you know, because you don't have to make sure when they're designing the miniatures that they can go big and brash and mad. You know, the base size is doesn't really matter particularly. You know, it hasn't got to rank up, it hasn't got to not break the game, I guess, because they just keep changing bits. I mean, Ilariel rides on a freaking giant beetle. I mean, that model is absolutely stunning. Stunning miniature, you know, that maybe you wouldn't have seen. Marathi's now a half snake loon coming up round a temple, you know. I mean, I could talk all day about how much I love Warhammer Fantasy, Warhammer the Old World, because I do.
There are things I prefer about Warhammer Fantasy quite a lot, I think. One of the things is, I know you were just saying how you like Age of Sigmar because it's so accessible. One of the things that makes it accessible is if you pick a unit, you have 10 and it's like 100 points. And if you pick a hero, you pick your hero and you might be able to give them one upgrade. I actually used to really like, and still do, the little details of how you kit your units out and what items you give them and how you could equip your heroes. And I used to spend a lot of time tailor making heroes, and I could have like when I played against Jeremy, I had a hero on an eagle, and he had this item that gives him like a ward save for the first turn. So he was going to try and get across the table in the first turn to get into the war machines. But if it all went wrong and he failed his charge, he'd be quite exposed. But that's kind of the gamble in the build that I made of him. And I really liked all that. Like, you'd have a couple pages, like full pages of different items, and you'd have, like, I suppose Age of Sigmar has brought in now unique spell laws, which is good. But I liked that more, being able to personalize your army more and being able to personalize your units more and go right down to like 1 or 2 points left. You know, I could put a shield on that guy or something. I really liked all of that. Maybe because I didn't know, maybe I've got kind of an OCD list building kind of side to me that I kind of enjoyed indulging in that. But I like that, being able to tailor things precisely, which you can't do in Age of Sigmar.
Yeah, well, that's fair. You know, I did initially find it frustrating, more so like not being able to take out like one warrior, for example, to save a few points or what have you. But now I guess I'm just used to it. Now I look at 40k and I find it too daunting because it uses that system, that idea of doing the individual people, and I'm like, no, I haven't got time for that nonsense. I mean, when I want to build a list for Age of Sigmar with War Scroll Builder, it's just so fluid and so easy to do compared to anything else. With the only exception is War Master. That's the only one I've found that's quicker, and it's not by much. And I like that. I like that accessibility. But that's just because that's how I like to play. Oh, it does annoy me because what does annoy me about it though is Khorne's number is 8. So units should not come in 5s and 10s, for crying out loud. They should come in 8s. But there we are.
They do in your 40k army, don't they, though?
Yeah. They did. In fairness, this is the crack in my pretense of being a narrative player. They did in my Age of Sigmar army, but then I broke and was like, I can't be dealing with paying for 10 models and only taking 8 anymore. I need to take all 10.
Is there anything you prefer about Warhammer Fantasy?
prefer about Warhammer Fantasy?
Yeah, because you spoke a lot about
Dwarves.
what you love about Age of Sigmar.
Dwarves.
Dwarf.
I feel like at the moment, whilst the Caradron and the Fire Slayers are fleshed out, which is ace, and I love both those factions, I don't think they've done justice to dwarves. And in Warhammer Fantasy, the dwarves were just epic. And even though they were massively in decline by the time of the game as we were playing it, their history and their holds and everything about them, they were just elite. And I do like dwarves. I do like dwarves a lot. It's also true of like the Empire, but I guess that's because it was fleshed out over years and years, which is longer than Age of Sigmar's been around. So like I know they're going to do the Cities of Sigmar this year, but or whatever they're doing, the Dawnbringer Crusades. But up to now, it's been a collection of bits and bobs, or it's felt that way. And I guess so. I quite like how it's probably closer to. I'm going to say reality, but that's not really what I mean. It's like Tolkien. If you watch Lord of the Rings, it kind of looks real. Like it's not like over the top madness. So Age of Sigmar is very insane at times. And and with that comes the painting challenge of doing all the bits and bobs. I like something a bit simpler sometimes. There is Stormcast, I guess.
Yeah, I think you're right. Age of Sigmar hasn't captured that yet. I'm hoping they do the Dawnbringers, but you never get the sense that you do when you think of like a Bretonnian peasant stuck in the mud and then a bloodthirster comes over the horizon. You never get that because there's always going to be a Stormcast or, a massive squig or, some sort of equally, mega gargant or something equally kind of as massive that's gonna come back. And there was all this hype surrounding monsters fighting monsters and things like that. And they have lost they've lost what it feels like to be normal. And there weren't ever really any stories about the normal citizens. There were some in the Malign Portents. And there were some short stories that I read about townsfolk and stuff, but it's not a primary focus. And sometimes I do think it is better for these, like a mega gargant, to be the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah, I guess the bit I like a lot about the old world was you could walk down a street in Altdorf and you could have been in London back in like the 1500s. And then you might go around a corner and see like an apothecarian or something, which again, you'd see in London. And you'd go in and then there might be like a tiny dragon or something sat on the counter with like fire, just hinting at that fantastical. And that I really like that. I like that kind of setting. It's the mystery, and very controversially, it's the bit I liked about Harry Potter is this idea that world is there, but it's alongside ours, and you can't quite see it. So it's got that real connection to reality in that regard. And I like that about Warhammer Fantasy. Whereas in Age of Sigmar, you could not step outside your front door and there would be some kind of fantastical beast running past. There would be a flipping pile of skulls in the corner. Your cutlery would be enchanted to cut your meat and stuff like that. It's just completely magical,
And then a pendulum would come through out of nowhere, out of the void. And
cut your ass in half. You just finished your extension. What?
I tell you something, that since I started playing Warhammer Fantasy again, and this will be kind of controversial, is that there are ways in which that game is now simpler than Age of Sigmar, because there's no battalions. All the rules are contained in the book. There's no extra rules on the war scrolls other than just the stats and your specific magic items. There's no secondary objectives every turn that you have to pick and go after. When I played I played 6th edition recently, and that's an edition that I haven't played since 6th edition. And the Wood Elf 6th edition book came out in 2006, I think. So it's been a long time. And actually, although I did have to refer to the rule book a bit, once I got into it, I actually found it really simple. And I was expecting it to be really difficult because the movement is clunky and there's always march blocking and you can't get within an inch. And then if you want to wield or you want to go back, it's like, a certain percentage of your movement. And I thought it was going to be all like that. But actually, it played quite fluidly. And now I think Age of Sigmar can be getting a bit over the top with how many rules that there are added on. Especially, I think to myself, there are lots of rules that they have started to rectify this, for example, with wards, and there are common rules now across war scrolls, but that wasn't always the case. So that's just an observation, really, that I always used to think of myself that Warhammer Fantasy was the more complicated game, but I'm not convinced now.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think Age of Sigmar has got a lot of rules now. I think the movement, and this is a personal thing to me, really, but movement in Age of Sigmar is much less frustrating than movement in Warhammer Fantasy battles. And so I prefer that a lot because I used to get so frustrated. I suppose
you should have collected Wood Elves and had all skirmish units like I did, because the movement hasn't changed.
No. I guess the risk now, of course, is that frustration comes from rules being pulled out of nowhere you didn't even know existed, which is much more likely in Age of Sigmar. But
all right, well, I think we're in agreement with this one. We both think Age of Sigmar is the better game, or that we prefer to play. I mean, we don't play Warhammer Fantasy. We haven't played Warhammer Fantasy together for a long time. But I did put it to the community, and I asked them what they thought. We had 122 responses, and I said, which do you prefer, Age of Sigmar, Warhammer Fantasy Battles, or other? And the response was 58% of people preferred Age of Sigmar, 38% preferred Warhammer Fantasy Battles, and the remaining were other. So quite close, 60-40 really is what you would say, wouldn't you? Rather than 58-30.
Did anyone comment on what their other was?
Yeah. Goatman couldn't choose. He loved both. Loves them both. Reverage, I like skirmish-sized games, more time on Warcry. 3 weeks ago today, Chris Goff commented, more time, and I replied, why aren't we playing it then?
And you played it last night. That's great.
Yeah. And we had one response that was 40k. Was their preferred, which probably is most people's preferred game because it's the most popular miniatures game out there.
There we go.
And I didn't stick on the fence. I chose one for the first time.
Very good.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for watching. If you've got any ideas for any topics you'd like to see us cover, please leave a comment. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to drop it a like, and we will catch you next time.
Bye.
Thank you very much for watching. Please be sure to leave a comment and let me know what you think. I do read every single comment. If you've enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a like. And if you'd like to see more content like this in the future, please consider subscribing to the channel. Now, I'd really like to use this time to thank those of you who support us on Patreon or those of you who are YouTube members. You guys have entered the Hall of Heroes and you really are champions in our eyes, and we raise our glasses to you and salute you. You help make it possible for us to do what we do and invest in our equipment, help pay for the hosting of the audio of the podcast and all kinds of other things. Now, if you would like to support the channel, the absolute best way to do this is to join the ranks of the Hall of Heroes and to sign up either by Patreon or YouTube members, and there's a link in the description below. And we also have some exclusive merchandise only available there as well. So a huge thank you to Cedar Kuru Khan. This has been 9 Inch Charge, and I will catch you next time.